Hi and welcome to this video where, as you can see, the cam cover is now back on. So basically what was involved in that was applying the sealant on the underside of this cam cover with the cams in, getting it back onto the engine. So in theory what was broken on this engine has now been repaired. So hopefully it's just a case now of putting everything back together and hopefully it works. So what I've also done though is, because I needed to know that that oil was definitely getting up to the camshafts, is I've also done a little bit of a demo where I actually turned the oil pump by hand and checked the oil was actually coming up and through. So I've also done that. So hopefully this video will be of use to you, and if it is, I'd appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to my channel, as that sort of helps keep things going. So yeah, hope you enjoy this and thank you for watching.
So before we seal the engine up forever, here's a few photos just showing the various parts before we actually commence work. Now the main ones to actually notice on this are the oil holes there, which we mustn't get sealant into. So the first thing to do is to start cleaning the old sealant from the cylinder head. So what I'm going to do is cover all the various holes before I actually start this, because I'm going to be using the 3M Rolock bristle discs. Now it actually says in the manual that you should use a gasket dissolving agent, which probably is the best thing to do, because there is sealant that's in some of those ridges there, and that's quite awkward for something like a bristle disc to actually get to. And obviously using something like a slightly abrasive disc isn't always the best answer on something sensitive like an aluminium casting. But since I don't actually have any of this dissolving agent, I think I'll go with the 3M Rolock discs. I use them on the Honda. So anyway, so the first thing I'm going to do here is obviously cover the little oil ways, because I definitely don't want anything to go down there. And here is the 3M bristle disc. So this does remove the sealant quite nicely. I think they're quite effective. This is 120 grit. And as you can see, that is actually cleaning it off quite nicely. But it obviously does take a slight amount of the aluminium away, which isn't technically ideal. So again, I'm just going to move the PV electrical tape there, move it to one side, so I can just get that little bit of sealant off there. And then very carefully I'm going to relocate this now, so I can do the other side. So again, we've got a couple of oil holes there for the cams. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of tape on that. And one there at the front for the exhaust cam. So I'm trying to be very gentle here. I'm obviously not pushing down, because I obviously don't want to actually eat any of the aluminium away. So I'm trying to go as lightly as possible. You can actually see a slight aluminium smear on that tape there, which does obviously show you that some of the aluminium is actually being removed. And then we've obviously got the centres to do, which is a little bit more tricky, especially with something like the bristle disc. So again, we've got another cam oil way there, that's for the intake. And then the one at the back there, again that's for the intake. And I actually forgot to put a piece of tape over the oil way for the chain tensioner. So this is where the bristle disc struggles a bit, because it's not getting in there very well to get the centre part of the sealant out. And obviously the more I work away at it, I'm actually working away at the soft aluminium, which is not what you actually want to do. So I think the dissolving agent is probably the way to go on this, because again I'm now left with trying to dig that sealant out with a little screwdriver, which again isn't great. So the bristles will sort of get in there now that most of it's out. I tend to use what I've got to hand, which isn't always the most correct way of doing something. So you can see a slight little bit of shininess to that black cling film. Get that out of the way. And then I'll give it all a little gentle blow over to try and get rid of any of the dust. I did want to try and hoover this, but I didn't actually really have a suitable adapter for the hoover. So, and then we can just get these bits of tissue out. And then hopefully this is ready now just for giving a clean with some brake cleaner. And now to check if oil is getting to the camshafts. So there's a quick photo to show where I expect to see oil come from if I rotate the oil pump by hand. So anyway, so what we'll do is we'll get some nice fresh oil. So I was thinking about 2.5 litres. That actually didn't seem to be quite enough. So I did actually put a little bit more in there. So I'm just pouring that in there so it should drop straight down to the sump. And then I did something rather silly here. I obviously put some oil into the pistons to make sure I didn't sort of scratch the balls. But then, being such a high compression engine, being diesel, as soon as I rotated that, it was going to shoot oil straight up onto the overhead camera. There we go. Oh dear. That wasn't too clever. You can see it just shoot up there. Here it comes. Whoomp. Straight onto the camera lens. Right then, so now time to clean the engine oil off the camera and lens. So one of the things I did realise once I was rotating that was no oil is actually going to get to the top without an oil filter in it. Because obviously these oil filters also have a little nipple on there to stop the oil draining back into the sump. So I think we best put the new filter on that we've had sat on the side. Get a new seal in there. And I think this might actually help with the oil flow through the cylinder head. Right then, we'll try this again now. So I'm taking extra caution now with a little bit of plastic on the top there. It was actually sort of popping the bubble wrap as well as I was sucking it in. The suction was actually popping that plastic. So yeah, we've got oil coming out. It's not shooting everywhere. So I think I can now take the plastic off and possibly have a look at that in a little bit more detail. So here we are. A little bit clearer without the plastic. Now I'm not quite sure why the oil is actually coming up nice and black. There's presumably some oil still in the oil pump. But we've definitely got an oil flow there. So this does make me still very curious as to why there was a dry bearing cap on the exhaust camshaft. Because clearly we have plenty of oil coming up there that would be going to those camshafts. Lots of oil. Right then. So now to reinstall the 16 rocker arms, or cam followers as they're sometimes called. So these rocker arms do need to go back in order. So I put a piece of yellow tape on there to remind me that that was for the rear ones, which is for the inlet cam. So we'll pop those on, and I put a piece of black tape on for the exhaust cam, just so I knew which was which. So these have been in oil, but it was actually the hydraulic, these parts that needed to be soaked in oil really. These like tappets, hydraulic tappets. So I think Haynes meant those were supposed to go in oil, not the rockers. But anyway, so the rockers have been oiled nicely, won't do them any harm. So we just get these all back into position, like so. Imagine the disaster this would be if I actually forgot to put those rocker arms back in before putting the cams on. Goodness me. Right, now to prepare the cylinder head and cam cover by degreasing and making ready for that final joining. So what I'm going to do here is obviously make sure all the holes are completely clear of any oil, because some oil did go into those. And if you were to then put the threads in, you'd effectively cause like a hydraulic pressure, which could possibly crack the casting. So you do need to make sure that's all clean, and then obviously go over everything with some brake cleaner so that the sealant can get a good purchase onto the metal parts of the head. So that's looking okay now. Now, I nearly forgot to actually remove these seals that are for the injectors. I won't say I was actually tempted to try and reuse them, because that would be highly silly. But anyway, so yeah, I'm actually going to knock these out before I put this on, and I will order some new ones, because I think reusing those might be very foolish. So that's what they look like. So we'll get some more of those ordered now, I think. Right, so what I also need to do now is just check that the chain is still correctly aligned, because again that would be a bit of a disaster if it was 1/2 out or something. And then what I'm also going to do is just make sure the inlet cam is lined up where the pin was, just for the sake of putting it back on exactly as I took it off. So I'm just going to line that up so I know that the cams are in the position they came off. And then again, what I've got to do here is go over this with some brake cleaner, make sure it's all scrupulously clean, so that sealant has the best chances of bonding on there. So this blue towel isn't the cheap stuff, this actually sort of stays together. And then finally what I'm going to do is just put a little smear of that assembly grease on each of the cam lobes, just to give the cams a little bit of a break for when we actually start the engine up after this minor overhaul. Okay, so that should be basically ready now. So the time has finally come to apply the sealant to the cam cover. So to help me get the sealant in the right place, what I've done here is actually coloured in one of the photos so I can see exactly where all the sealant should be. Now it's mainly got to be on the inside of everything, because obviously that's where the oil would be. So it's like where the threads are, you'd go on the inside of the threads towards the centre of the engine. So obviously I'm just going to put some of this around there, which is where the studs will go. Then these parts, So like I say, around the inside is the important part, but I'm obviously adding it as well around the whole of each of the screw holes, which technically you don't actually have to do. But just double check that you've got all that exactly right before dropping it on top of the engine. And now to tighten the 24 fasteners in the correct sequence. So again, here's a photo which you may wish to print out just so you know what the sequence is. So that's what I did, is I actually printed it out so that I didn't make any mistakes. So then we can just carefully lower this cover down with the cams on. Now it can move around quite a bit on there, and you do need to align this cam cover with the base of the cylinder head and make sure there's no ridges in that where the vacuum pump is and where the sprocket is. So then what I'll do is I'll just get all my 24 fasteners in place, just make sure they're all threading in nicely. So you can see there's quite a bit of movement there on that cover, so it's not like a rigid fixing. So as I was tightening it down, I then sort of was constantly checking to make sure there was no ridge on those two sort of holes on each side. So I was gradually tightening it down bit by bit in the correct sequence. So just checking there that the top and bottom are meeting perfectly. Just tapping it gently there just to make sure it's all lined up. So I was doing that as I was putting the head down. Now I've just put the old camshaft seal in there. I've inverted it just to try and help me line that up. And then again, we've got to make sure where the vacuum pump goes, the top and the bottom meet exactly, and there's no lip there. It's got to be nice and smooth and meet perfectly. So once we've done that, we tighten them all up to 10 Newton meters. Again, starting in the correct sequence, like so. I've cut most of the sequence out because it's obviously going to be very monotonous. And then we end with number 24, like so. So that's the cover now on, and then I'm just going to give everything a little wipe out with my finger there, just any excess sealant. Doesn't say to do that, but there is a little bit of excess there, so I can't see any harm in wiping that out. And again there's a slight bit of sealant that's oozed out, so just try and tidy that off. So that seems to have met perfectly. The other side there is a slight ridge, disappointingly. I can feel a little bit of a lip there with my fingernail, so hopefully that won't be a problem. But anyway, I think that's the cam cover now on, and we can progress putting the engine back together. Right then, so here's some reference photographs which you can pause to view for longer. So we start there with the cams on top showing how they meet, and that's without the camshafts, so you can see the oil ways and obviously the various parts on top of the cylinder head. So you can actually see the cylinder head bolts there and the oil ways coming up through the cylinder head. And now we've put all the rocker arms back on. So this is just another one to show the sealant, and there it is, all coloured in red, and the blue oil ways, and there's our tightening sequence. Okay then, so you've been watching refitting the camshafts and oil pump test on a 2009 MINI R56, and thank you for watching, and I hope this video helps you service and maintain your car within your budget. This video was filmed and edited by me, Mark Savage, in May 2022, and I can be found on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter as Goats and Gators.